Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. In the early hours of a cold November morning, the quiet suburb of Maplewood lay shrouded in a thick fog that hung in the air like a morning veil. The streets, usually alive with the hustle and bustle of family life, were eerily still. On this particular morning, there was a profound sense of unease that seeped into the bones of the community, a feeling that something sinister had taken root just beyond the quaint facades of its charming homes. At 6:15 a.m., a 911 call shattered the silence. A woman's voice trembled on the line, panic crackling through the thin air. "There's been an accident. I think he's dead." The dispatcher, trained to maintain calm in crises, probed for deep. She learned that the victim was a 34-year-old man named Nathan Holbrook, an unassuming accountant known to neighbors as a dedicated family man. He was found sprawled across the living room floor of his modest two-story house, lifeless, with blood pooling around his head. The gaping wound suggested violence, that kind of violence that might tear through the fabric of this peaceful enclave. Detectives arrived on the scene, their breath visible in the frigid air. They stepped cautiously over the threshold, noting the overturned coffee table, the broken picture frame remnants of a violent struggle. With each movement, they gathered fragmented pieces of the puzzle, aware that the investigation would peel back layers of an ordinary life, revealing hidden complexities beneath. Maplewood was not ready for the darkness that had arrived in the early hours of that November morning. Little did they know, the search for answers would lead them deep into the shadows of Nathan's life, where buried secrets lay in wait. The victim. Nathan Holbrook was the kind of man who blended seamlessly into the backdrop of suburban life, known for his quick smile and an often subdued demeanor. He worked diligently as an accountant at a local firm, his days spent buried under spreadsheets and fiscal reports. To his neighbors, Nathan was the go-to guy for anything technically could fix a computer as effortlessly as he could lend an ear over backyard barbecues. Yet behind those friendly eyes lay a complexity few ever considered. Nathan had grown up in a fractured home, the youngest of three in a family rife with tension and secrets. His father had struggled with addiction, generating an atmosphere of unpredictability that Nathan never quite escaped. He had vowed to build a different life for himself, a life anchored in stability and transparency. On the outside, the Holbrook household appeared picture perfect. Nathan's wife, Claire, was warm and nurturing, the kind of person who wrote loving notes for Nathan to find in his lunch. Their daughter, Lily, was the light of their lives, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with aspirations of being a dancer. Neighbors often noted the laughter that echoed from their home, but for Nathan, the perfect facade sometimes felt like a prison. Detectives began uncovering Nathan's life piece by piece, reaching out to those closest to him. Claire described her husband's dedication to family, sharing anecdotes of their weekends spent at the park, where Nathan taught Lily how to ride her bike. But when asked about their marriage, Claire's eyes dimmed. For all the love that filled their home, there were whispers of stress. Financial strains from a failed investment had begun to chip away at Nathan's otherwise placid demeanor. As the sun rose higher, casting light upon the lingering shadows, detectives wondered if the clues they were uncovering were more than just pieces of Nathan's life. They felt like threads woven into a larger mystery, waiting to be unwrapped. The crime scene. The crime scene was a tableau of chaos, a chilling contrast to the mundane life that typically filled the Holbrook home. The living room, where Nathan was discovered, radiated a disconcerting stillness, echoing the aftermath of violence that had marred its comforting ambience. Thick drapes hung heavy in the windows, allowing only slivers of the morning light to filter through, casting long shadows across the floor where Nathan's body lay. Detectives McCormick and Lane arrived, their senses sharply attuned to the atmosphere, saturated with grief and confusion. They scanned the room, each detail imprinted in their minds. The overturned furniture, the scattered magazines lying in a chaotic splay, and the splatters of blood that painted stark, terrifying patterns against the pale walls. The brutality of the scene contrasted sharply with the cozy decor-framed photos of the Holbrooks smiling in happier times, a family portrait featuring Claire and Lily, capturing the essence of love at its purest. Nearby, a tipped-over coffee mug lay near the couch, an enigma unto itself. It hinted at the mundane that had preceded the horror. Maybe Nathan had been enjoying a quiet moment with a cup of coffee when the attack. The scene suggested an unexpected struggle had unfolded, its details obscured beneath the choking pall of grief that now hung heavily in the air. As for Nathan, he was pronounced dead nearly instantaneously. A blunt force trauma to the back of his head, and a gash on his temple that suggested he had been struck with a heavy object. The coroner's preliminary assessment indicated that the attack had taken place late the previous evening, positioning the time of death sometime between 9 and 10 p.m. Crime scene technicians arrived next, methodically photographing every angle, collecting evidence with practiced precision. They noted a shattered window slightly ajar, the glass spread across the patio like shards of a broken prop. With scarce signs of forced entry, they began to wonder, was this an opportunistic crime, or had someone Nathan knew crossed the threshold to inflict such violence? As the sun climbed higher and the fog lifted, illuminating the dark corners of the Holbrook home, it was clear. This had been no random act of violence. The question echoed in the minds of the investigators. What hidden truths would surface as they began to peel back the layers of Nathan Holbrook's life? The early investigation. With the crime scene secured and initial assessments made, the investigation shifted into high gear. Detectives McCormick and Lane dove into interviews, starting with the most pivotal people surrounding Nathan's life. The urgency surged. They needed context to understand the motive behind such a brutal murder. Claire Holbrook, sitting in the living room, looked small and fragile against the bed invaded her sanctuary. Tears stained her cheeks as she recounted the previous evening. "We were supposed to have family movie night," she said, her voice quavering. Nathan was so excited about it. But something felt off. Her eyes darted to a stack of mail on the side table, comprised of late bills and collection notices, a telltale indication of growing stress. When asked about their finances, Claire's expression twisted with guilt and frustration. "I thought he was handling it," but now she trailed off, choking on the empty words. Detectives noted the strain in her voice. They spoke with Lily next, whose innocent eyes were a stark contrast to the grim circumstances. "Daddy went to fix the computer," the little girl had said, her brow furrowing as if struggling to piece together the evening's events. "He didn't come back." Next, the detectives reached out to Nathan's colleagues at the accounting firm. As the investigators interviewed coworkers, a pattern began to form. Several mentioned recent work-related stress. Nathan had been juggling tight deadlines, especially concerning a major client facing an IRS audit. Tension hung thick in the air, and there were whispers of something more, rumors about crooked dealings and financial discrepancies that Nathan had hinted at but never fully disclosed. Each lead deepened the mystery. The duo followed up on an anonymous tip that hinted at a disgruntled client who had expressed dissatisfaction with Nathan's work. The name rang a bell. Leonard Tully, a man known for his volatile temper and aggressive business tactics. As they pursued this angle, McCormick and Lane began to suspect that Nathan's murder wasn't merely a crime of passion, but rather a sinister entanglement involving treachery, deception, and the very fabric of trust that had been shattered on that fateful evening. With each passing hour, the stakes grew higher. The truth remained elusive, yet the detectives felt it just beyond their reach, waiting to be discovered. The dead ends. Days melted into weeks as the investigation trudged forward, yet progress felt agonizingly slow. The once vibrant energy of hope had begun to fade, replaced by the hollow echo of desperation that loomed over Maplewood. Detective McCormick stood in front of the whiteboard, plastered with notes and timelines, every lead meticulously constructed, only to crumble into a heap of frustration. The more they dug, the murkier Nathan's life appeared. Interviews with coworkers painted a conflicting portrait. Some loved his work ethic. Others acknowledged he could be ruthless in business. Leonard Tully, their promising lead, turned out to be more elusive than anticipated. When detectives finally tracked him to his office, he claimed to possess an alibi that checked out. He was at a bar, surrounded by clients, celebrating a deal well won. Frustrated, they attempted to interview others from Nathan's workplace, yet the results were disheartening. One said he had heard Nathan moaning about financial issues, but assumed his struggles were typical of any family man. Another claimed not to see any red flags. Seemingly, Nathan's personal and professional stress had drawn a thick curtain that shielded his inner turmoil from the world. Claire, too, remained a riddle. Though her grief was palpable, something felt slightly amiss during their conversations. Each time she was asked about potential rivals or unusual behavior from Nathan, her responses wavered, gliding just beneath the surface. Detectives dug deeper, but found only a cloud of ambiguity. Claire had no criminal connections and possessed an alibi that aligned with her daughter's account of the events prior to the murder. At the same time, forensic analyses yielded little besides evidence of struggle. The murder weapon remained unidentified. No fingerprints were found amidst the chaos. Each piece of physical evidence they clung to felt like wisps of smoke slipping through their fingers. In the dead of night, as McCormick pored over the case file at his cluttered desk, the flickering light of the desk lamp illuminated a small detail he had overlooked. A report noting that had heard arguments coming from the Holbrook, noting that a neighbor had heard arguments coming from the residence days before the murder. The investigation had reached a stalemate, but this new avenue revealed an unexpected flicker of hope. With renewed purpose, he drafted questions, determined to chase the thread of the uncharacteristic violence echoing from beyond the walls of that once peaceful home. In unraveling this mystery, he believed clarity would ultimately come. The darkness that enveloped Nathan Holbrook's life was not complete. They were just a step away from penetrating its depths. Ache in the case. As daylight broke over Maplewood, bringing with it a crisp autumn chill, the air was charged with anticipation. Detective McCormick, fueled by newfound determination, organized a fresh round of interviews with neighbors and community members. This time, focusing on the days leading up to Nathan's death. The lingering whispers from the early investigation felt like a haunting melody, and he was ready to follow them to their conclusion. The neighbor who had initially reported the arguments was Mrs. Green, an elderly woman whose keen hearing had often made her the unwitting sentinel of neighborhood disputes. She sat in her sunlit living room, a cup of tea trembling in her hands as she recalled the events that had unfolded. "I didn't think much of it at first," she murmured, her voice raspy. "But about 3 days before, it was quite loud." I heard a man's voice, raised and angry, and Claire was. She sounded panicked. Concern etched on her face. Mrs. Green continued. "They were arguing about money, I think. At one point, I heard Nathan say something like, 'You don't understand what I have to deal with.' Then there was silence, and that's when I thought maybe it was just another marital spat." With this new piece of information, McCormick and Lane delved deeper into Nathan's financial troubles and any associates who might have had knowledge of his vulnerabilities. They learned that Nathan had recently become involved in a business venture that left him stretched thin. It was a real estate investment that he had kept to himself, believing it would be his ticket to financial freedom, only to find himself entwined with unscrupulous partners who had connections to organized crime. Digging further into these connections, they learned about a man named Case.Shadows, a shadowy figure associated with various dubious dealings in the area. Alarm bells rang in McCormick's mind as he connected the dots, suspecting that Nathan's investment may have entangled him with individuals whose vicious behavior knew no limits. In a sudden twist, a local informant, eager to lighten his own legal troubles, stepped forward. He claimed to have seen Nathan arguing with Shadows a mere day before the murder, a confrontation that had erupted into an exchange of threats. With renewed fervor, the detectives secured a search warrant for Shadows' properties, hoping to find conclusive evidence linking him to Nathan's brutal end. A sense of urgency thrummed through the air as McCormick and Lane set their sights on this newfound lead. The prospect of uncovering the truth loomed large and no longer lost in the shadows. They felt the investigation surge forward, guided by the flickering light illuminating the path ahead. The veil of deceit surrounding Nathan Holbrook's life had begun to lift, and with it, the promise of resolution seemed tantalizingly close. The suspect. The sun dipped low on the horizon as Detective McCormick and Lane positioned themselves outside a dilapidated warehouse on the borderline between Maple District. Rumors had circled about Case.Shadows, the man linked to Nathan's investment gone wrong. Known for his connections to the city's underbelly, Shadows had built a reputation on intimidation and manipulation traits that made him particularly formidable. As they stepped inside the warehouse, the air thickened with a musty odor of damp concrete and oil. Shadows loomed over a haphazard collection of crates, looking strangely like a ruined empire waiting to be unearthed. The detectives exchanged glances, each of them silently affirming their resolve. Their search turned up little until a local officer approached with a grim expression. "We found something," he stated, holding up a metallic object coated in grime. The faint outline of what appeared to be a blood-stained crowbar was revealed under a thin layer of dust. The eerie discovery silenced the room. The investigators knew instinctively they belonged to Nathan's murder. With the crowbar now considered pivotal evidence, the detectives pinpointed their next move. They would need to confront Case.Shadows directly. Later that evening, dressed in tactical gear, they approached his known haunted bar known as the Oar. frequented by those operating in the shadows. Inside, the atmosphere pulsed with dark energy, voices mingling with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Case.Shadows stood at a corner table, his broad-shouldered figure radiating confidence that bordered on arrogance. As McCormick and Lane made their approach, they noted the way patrons instinctively parted like a sea, clearing a path for the imposing figure. Case.Shadows, McCormick began, steady and assertive. "We need to talk about Nathan Holbrook." The man's icy gaze assessed them, a flicker of irritation dancing in his eyes. "Who wants to talk about a nobody?" he replied, his voice low, steely. "I have better things to do." "Perhaps you'd like to answer some questions about his death," Lane interjected, maintaining her composure. "We've got evidence linking you to him, a crowbar we pulled from your warehouse." Case.Shadows' expression hardened, an unyielding facade, masking anything that could be interpreted as fear. "You've got no idea what you're talking about," he spat, but the edge in his voice betrayed an internal tremor. As the tension thickened, the detectives weren't searching for a confession, but rather the cracks in Case.Shadows' carefully constructed image. They punctuated every question with strategic pauses, each inquiry unraveling the threads of his composure. Eyes locked onto him like hawks narrowing in on their prey. "I wasn't involved." The guy was a loser, always whining about money. Case.Shadows snapped, yet even this harsh denial held a strained undertone. The conversation veered, probing past his bravado into uncharted territories, until finally McCormick leaned in, his voice low and measured. "Money doesn't matter after you're dead, Marco. Wouldn't you prefer to play the game while you're alive?" Or heartbeat. What lay beneath the surface flickered in Case.Shadows' eyes an admission, a flicker of fear, perhaps even guilt to us if suddenly realizing he was being cornered. In that moment, McCormick and Lane knew they had drawn blood. They departed with a promise. This was only the beginning, and they were closing in. The air was electric with possibility. The specter of Nathan Holbrook's murder lingered not far behind as the pieces began to align. Case.Shadows' facade trembled, and the truth beckoned just beyond the horizon. The trial. As winter descended upon Maplewood, the atmosphere crackled with a mixture of nervous anticipation and simmering tension. The trial of Marco Case.Shadows had finally arrived, and the quaint courthouse that normally bustled with minor disputes quickly transformed into a battleground of legal strategists. News of Nathan Holbrook's murder had reverberated through the community, drawing a crowded audience eager to witness the unfolding drama. Detective McCormick sat in a corner of the courtroom, his instincts heightened as he observed the proceeding. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators, each anticipating the unraveling story that had gripped the very heart of their community. Case.Shadows, now clad in a crisp suit that sharply contrasted the man they had confronted in that dark bar, exuded an air of calculated calmness. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of Nathan's final days, deftly reciting witness testimonies from Claire, neighbors, and the detectives, linking Case.Shadows through the crowbar discovered at his warehouse, a weapon driven deep into the heart of this case. Yet with every thundering assertion, Case.Shadows' defense attorney countered with pointed skepticism, raising questions over the reliability of witness accounts and insinuating alternative theories that swirled like smoke. "Accidental death," the attorney clamored, his voice booming through the gallery. Perhaps Nathan's financial woes led him down a dark path, one where he sought the aid of those far grimmer than we could imagine. Who is to say he didn't put himself in a precarious position in a moment of desperation? McCormick clenched his fists, acknowledging the cunning nature of the defense's tactics. But the prosecutor was relentless as her arguments cut through the fabric of doubt as she laid out the facts before the jury. Shadows' unresolved grudge against Nathan over failed business dealings, and a chilling history of violence spoke to his character. Then came the pivotal moment. Claire Holbrook took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she recounted the love she had shared with Nathan, filling the empty space formed by his absence. Her soft voice resonated with raw emotion as she described the night of the murder, the fear that had settled over their home like a pall. It wasn't just a fight. Claire's voice trembled. It was as if he was slowly losing control, and I couldn't keep him safe. All I wanted was a life free of fear, and then he was gone. As she spoke, tears flowed freely, tearing through the courtroom like a somber tide. Each word tethered the jury to the reality of Nathan's loss, a poignant reminder that behind every statistic lay a life, a family, and a gaping void left in the wake of death. Days turned into an agonizing succession of witness testimonies, expert analyses, and meticulous cross-examinations. The crucible of justice unfurled, and the courtroom became an arena where every emotional thrust was met with calculated rebuttal. Finally, it arrived, a charged atmosphere as the jury filed in to deliver their verdict. A silence enveloped the courtroom. The air felt thick with anguish and expectation. As the foreman read, "We find the defendant, Marco Ciato, guilty of first-degree murder." An exhale rippled through the gallery, a wave of catharsis washing over those who had endured the tumultuous journey. In that moment, a glimmer of justice pierced through the fog that surrounded Nathan Holbrook's life and death. The verdict wasn't merely a win for the investigation team or the legal system. It was a balm for a shattered community, a fractured family resurrecting hope amidst the shadows that once loomed over them. Though the scars remained, the truth had emerged from the depths, finally allowing Nathan's memory to rest. The aftermath. The courthouse doors swung shut with a soft thud, echoing the finality of the trial. Outside, a crowd had gathered, reporters jockeying for position alongside curious onlookers, eager to piece together the aftermath of a tragedy that had sent tremors through their close-knit community. The verdict had been delivered, but the emotional fallout loomed larger than ever, and deep conversations merged with hushed whispers filled the frigid winter air. Detective McCormick stood at a distance, observing the chaos unfold, a mixture of relief and melancholy settling in his chest. Justice had been served, yet each victory felt bittersweet. He couldn't shake the memory of Nathan Holbrook's lifeless body, life that had been taken, the shattered dreams left in the wake of violence. As reporters clamored for sound bites from those who had witnessed the trial, his thoughts turned to Claire and Lily, the faces that served as a stark reminder of the cost of such tragedies. In the days that followed, Claire struggled through an unrelenting fog of grief. The verdict had offered her a measure of solace, yet it could not fill the void left by Nathan's absence. With each passing day, she found herself perched on the edge of an emotional precipice. Morning was a tempest, and every moment of normalcy felt perilously close to being swept away. Attempting to create a semblance of stability for Lily, Claire enrolled her in a local dance class, hoping the activity would provide a distraction. However, reminders of her father were omnipresent. The family photos still adorned the walls, and echoes of his laughter lingered in the corners of their home. Alone at night, Claire would often sit with a glass of wine, replaying their memory as carefully curated snippets of joy, now tinged with heartache. Meanwhile, McCormick returned to the precinct, But the case continued to haunt him. It wasn't just about solving a crime. It was the weight of the lives that were irrevocably altered. As he and Lane compiled their case files, the significance of Nathan's story crystallized into a clarion call, harsh reminder that life could change in an instant. In the weeks that stacked up like fallen leaves, the community of Maplewood rallied behind Claire and Lily. Fundraisers sprang up. Local businesses offered support. And slowly but surely, the resiliency of a grieving family began to take shape. Amidst the sorrow, understanding blossomed in unexpected ways, as neighbors rallied not just to share condolences, but to ensure that the Holbrook family was embraced in love and support. As the new year approached, a palpable shift occurred. Claire began to find threads of hope intertwined with her grief. The community that had come together to honor Nathan found ways to remember him. Community picnics and charity events would be dedicated to his memory, each gathering a refusal to let Nathan fade into the background. McCormick, too, understood the importance of those collective acts of remembrance. He dedicated a small section of the precinct to Nathan's case, ensuring that future detectives would learn from the complexities it presented, the importance of digging beyond the surface, of pushing through silence. In that way, the aftermath evolved into something deeper than despair. It transformed into a story of connection, a tapestry woven from strands of grief, resilience, and newfound understanding. Nathan Holbrook was no longer just a tragic statistic. He was a reminder that even in the aftermath of darkness, light could emerge, one act of kindness at a time. Reflection. As the first hints of spring began to thaw the chill that lingered through Maplewood, Detective McCormick found solace during his evening walks through the neighborhood. He meandered along familiar paths, noticing the way life had slowly returned. Children played, laughter echoed, and blossoms decorated the bare branches, marking a vibrant renewal after the bleak winter. Yet, beneath the surface, a current of lingering sorrow remained, palpable in the hearts of those who had been touched by Nathan Holbrook's tragic story. Each step led McCormick to a quiet park where he often reflected, seeking answers among whispered memories. The air was crisp, filled with the scents of blooming flowers and budding trees. Resting on a bench, he watched as families gathered, children running with unbridled joy, embodying the very innocence that Nathan had sought to protect. This juxtaposition of life and loss stirred in him a deep meditation on the fragility of existence. Perhaps the most haunting realization was how fleeting moments could cascade into irreversible change. Nathan had been a father, a husband, a friend, a man who had dreams and aspirations, all stolen in a matter of seconds by one irrevocable act of violence. Here, amidst laughter and love, McCormick understood that detective work was not just about piecing together a crime. It was about understanding the ripple effects, the people left behind. With clarity washing over him, McCormick resolved to continue championing the Truth case, a narrative, each victim a reminder that life's stories mattered. As he stood, ready to return home, he recognized that although darkness lingered in the world, it would never eclipse the potential for light, for hope, for renewal. Those who loved and left behind would never be forgotten. They would be celebrated, their struggles transformed into guiding beacons, steering communities toward compassion, understanding, and unity.